to get off a third, maybe a fourth shot. And you have to remember that when the rifle was found, there was a bullet in the chamber that was ejected. So that meant that the bolt was cocked again for a fourth shot. But Oswald or whoever had the rifle obviously didn't fire it.
Why did they never find a clip?
They did find a clip. It's visible in several photographs taken that day. In fact, you can go to the National Archives and view the clip and hold it. Honestly. Sylvia Meagher is responsible for the myth that there's no clip. She first publicized that fact in the book Accessories After the Fact, and it is incorrect.
Well, if that were true, frame 181 would have shown him shot, right? Because that was the first frame after the view.
No, because that's assuming that he fired the moment. The Warren Commission is saying that the first shot occurred around then. We're not saying that. I'm simply pointing out how the Warren Commission boxed itself in by only giving themselves 6 seconds. In other words, instead of saying, let's not come to any conclusions, let's just look at the data and see what the data tells us, they said, well, nobody would shoot until after he was clear from the tree. So that assumption itself is an assumption, and yet it gets treated as a fact, and it boxed them in. And in our investigation, we said, we're throwing everybody's data out. Let's see what the data itself says. Let's make no assumptions.
How many shots were fired?
How many shots were fired?
Yeah.
3.
Only 3?
Only 3, and I'll show you why in a few minutes. When you look at this mural here, what you're going to see, okay, and we have various enlargements here that I'll show you in a moment, is you're going to see along here a woman who's running along. She has a red pants on, okay, and you'll notice that as she's running along, she suddenly stops, okay, so she's running along this way, and then she suddenly stops and looks back towards the depository. Now that woman at the time was a little lady who was the daughter of a major who was taking photographs of the assassination at the time. The press interviewed the parents and not the girl. And Major Phil Willis said, well, my daughter stopped running when I yelled to her to stop. Well, when you talk to the Linda Willis, the major's daughter, she said, I didn't even hear my father yelling at me. I stopped when I heard the first shot. And you see, as she's running along, when she suddenly stops, you will see in the Zapruder film that President Kennedy and Governor Connolly are starting to go ahead and look to the left and to the right to try to find out what is going on. The first row of photographs that you see up in the mural, you can see her running along there. You'll also see that she has stopped, and she has like this incredulous look on her face, like she can't believe what she's seeing. And she is looking back up at the 6th floor depository window, and she is seeing somebody firing at the president. The Zapruder film also shows that her father is still taking pictures of the limousine at the time that he claims he yelled out to his daughter. So his recollection is wrong. Now, if we know the moment of the first shot, which we can assume because the woman's running along at full speed and then she stops because she hears the noise, that puts it at frame 160 and 161 of the Zapruder film, not after the limousine has cleared the branches of the tree. It in fact occurs just before the limousine is obscured by the branches. So there's evidence to indicate, and there are other eyewitness testimonies, that there was a spark that was seen in front of the limousine that indicates that the shot had missed, at least the first shot. There's also evidence too, based on the curb, the nick in the curb that was found 500 feet away that wounded James Tague, that the shot had been deflected. And a spectrographic analysis of the metal found in the curb showed that it was the core of the bullet and not the jacket that hit. And the core only separates from the jacket if the bullet strikes something. Now, when you look at the view of frame 160 to 161 as it was filmed through Oswald's rifle was sighted 4 inches high and to the right, which means the scope was not, calibrated. A lot of people have said, well, that's evidence that, it's even harder to hit your target. Well, yes and no. If your target is moving away from you or going from left to right, in order to shoot at a moving target, you have to do what they call lead it. You have to lead it, as in you have to aim a little bit ahead of the target in order to hit it. Well, if your rifle is sighted 4 inches to the right and high like this, you don't need to lead your target. Because you're not calibrated anyway, there's an automatic lead that happens. So we know that Oswald, or when the rifle was fired, that although it wasn't calibrated to hit the target, it didn't require that a person familiar with it would have to lead it.
Are you saying that was an accident?
No, I'm not saying it was an accident. I'm simply qualifying that, no, we don't know why the scope wasn't calibrated. I'm simply qualifying the fact that it was not necessary to lead the target. This is also something that the marksmen who were asked to duplicate Oswald's feat were never told. They were never told that the sighting was off and that they didn't need to lead the target. So when they led the target, thinking it was calibrated, they of course missed the target. And that went in the record books as proof that, you know, the feat couldn't be duplicated.
I thought the FBI had shimmed the scope up before they could even test it.
No, the FBI later on put a little shimmy under the scope so they could calibrate it. But initially, that is not how the tests were done. Okay?
What's the point?
Well, the point being that the Mannlicher Carcano rifle has been bad-mouthed, if you will, that it's an inaccurate, cheap weapon. It can't hit its target. Oswald was a poor shot, but that was most likely due to his dyslexia, not because he didn't have enough practice with the weapon.
That's what I'm thinking. A scope could be off any number of degrees, and if you work with it long enough, you can compensate what you want, sure.
Exactly.
So in all of his times of sitting there cocking it and everything else, he surely must have had time to fire it a few times to discover what its offage was.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, of all the people in the world who was most familiar with that rifle, there's no doubt it was Oswald. Now, whether he used it or not to actually kill the president, we'll find out shortly. So what we've...
On your
yes,
point
sir.
there, I mean, he'd have to, in order for that theory to work, he would have to practice with a moving target in order to calibrate his scope. And he'd have to practice with it that way. What scenario...
No, he doesn't have to practice, because if Oswald did kill the president, okay, it wasn't until a few days before the actual visit that Oswald was in a position to know that the limousine was going to pass right under him. He had just been hired at the depository a few weeks earlier. So unless Oswald was in on some conspiracy from day one, before even the White House knew where Kennedy was going to be, they had only planned the trip to Miami at that point. They had not confirmed that it was going to be Dallas. I mean, Lyndon Johnson had already been there. So what I'm getting at is he didn't necessarily have, you don't have to practice, in other words. Oswald had practice with it. Remember, it was shown that he did take a shot at General Walker. A lot of people forget that. And Walker was moving around, although he was sitting on his desk, when the shot went off. And the shot barely missed Walker by a couple of inches. It grazed his head.
Well, that wasn't proven. That was alleged.
No, it was proven. It was proven with neutron activation analysis of the bullets. You can actually get the lab reports and check them yourselves. When the initial report came out by the government in 1964, it was not proven. It was implied. Neutron activation analysis is brand new. But that test has been done twice now on the neutron activation analysis, and it was shown that the weapon did come from the Carcano, and it was from the same ammunition batch.
But doesn't it, yeah, the same ammunition batch could be, what was it, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of rounds?
No. The ammunition manufactured by the Western Cartridge Company for the Carcanos was a peculiar mix of lead and antimony. So if you had, the ratios were not consistent in the batch, but there was a consistency as far as what I'll call, well, how do you say it? Normally when you do a neutron activation analysis of, say, bullets, you can tell whether they're from the same batch of ammunition or not, okay, because there tends to be the same degrees of impurities per lot that they make. In the Western Cartridge ammunition, it's just the opposite, okay? What they're able to show is an inconsistency as far as lead versus antimony versus copper for the jacket that tends to be done per lot. And because the ammunition was only manufactured from 1942 through 1947 before they stopped it, because a lot of these weapons were unloaded in the United States as Italian war surplus weapons, there were only so many rounds made, and then they haven't been produced since. And the neutron activation analysis showed that the bullet that was recovered from the wall in Walker's study was from the same batch that was made from which Oswald had, the cartridges from the weapon. So now we know that the first shot occurred earlier than the Warren Commission says. It occurred earlier than the House Committee says. And of course we know when the last frame was, the fatal headshot at frame number 313. So if we have one shot around frame 160 and at least a third shot around frame 13, what about the shot that first wounded President Kennedy and Governor Connolly? Now here's where some of this stuff may be a little hard for you guys to believe, but again, this stuff can all be independently checked.
It's all on the presumption that there were no frames removed. That was one of the rumors that I heard.
There were 3 frames removed from the Zapruder film. A very dumb reason as to why it happened. When Time Life got one of the copies of the film, there were 3 copies actually made, 2 of the original. They gave one of the print copies, the one that the Warren Commission ended up with later, to a junior photo technician who, when he was working on the film, he damaged 3 frames. They were later deleted, and the 2 parts were spliced back together. In fact, if you own, for example, the Laserdisc version of Oliver Stone's movie JFK, you will see that that's the version they've been using, because just at the point where Willis stops and turns around, you see the top half of her body, and then you see her gone suddenly. I have the 3 frames at home. They were actually also published in Josiah Thompson's book, 6 Seconds in Dallas, so they have been accounted for. Also, the original Zapruder film and one of the copies that was made before this other copy was damaged are also available. So the frames aren't missing anymore, but during the time of the Warren Commission investigation they were, and unfortunately the Warren Commission didn't seem to want to hunt down the 3 frames, but they are accounted for. For President Kennedy, we know that one of the shots hit him in the back here. The issue has been, well, was he hit at the base of the neck or was he hit lower down in the middle of the spine? When I debated Gate and Fonzie on Larry King Live last November 22nd, Gate and Fonzie was arguing that the hole in the jacket of President Kennedy's jacket, the bullet hole, was too far down and did not match the hole that's visible in the back of his neck in the autopsy photos. Well, President Kennedy was leaning forward at the time as they began to be obscured by that little sign, okay? And when he was leaning forward as well, Kennedy also had raised his hands a little bit, his right hand. You got to remember he was waving to the crowd to the left and to the right. He only interrupted that after the first shot because he was trying to find out what was going on. Most people reported that that first shot sounded like a firecracker, not like a normal, not like the second and the third shots. Okay, Kennedy also wore a back brace and an ace bandage. And although he was a very well-tailored president, he actually became fascist or fashion conscious of fashions after he married Jackie. This part under here, both the shirt and the jacket, were bunched up a little bit. Now just a little bit, not a lot, okay? So when the bullet came down this way, once you compensate for the arm being raised, you see that the holes do line up.